Hi everyone, and welcome to Leeds Dad's Facebook Live AskADad. I'm Erroll Murray from Leeds Dads. We support dads and families to engage with their preschool children. And during these sessions, we talk about life under coronavirus, what it is, and how families can cope in the current situation. Our focus tonight is on relationships. Many of us are spending far more time than we're used to with those who share our homes. However, for some, staying home can be uncomfortable or intolerable. How do you support relationships under COVID? The UK's largest domestic abuse charity, Refuge, has reported a 700% increase in calls to its helpline in a single day. And a separate helpline for perpetrators of domestic violence seeking help to change their behaviour have received 25% more calls after the start of the COVID-19 lockdown. With me tonight is family therapist Stephen Derrick, who has a particular interest with working with fathers in the context of relationships with themselves and their partners. Matt Tattersley, the manager of men's support group Caring Dads, who's taking questions on how current restrictions might affect the behaviour of dads. And Ron Batiste, a member of Leeds Dads, who has experience in the care and legal fields. So if you have any questions, please get in touch. You can message us on facebook.com/Leeds Dads or @Leeds Dads on Twitter, and we'll do our best to answer. A little bit about coronavirus for those who are still looking for information. It's a new flu-like virus spreading around the world. The virus causes an illness called COVID-19. It's been declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization. That's the part of the United Nations that looks after the health and well-being of people around the world. What we know is that most people get symptoms of a fever. A lot of these people get a cough. Some show no symptoms at all. And that can be very confusing. So what can we do? How can we prevent ourselves from falling ill? It's all from what we've been told about social distancing, staying at least 2 meters away from each other and washing your hands a lot more than normal. So just recap on tonight's program. Our focus is on relationships. Many of us are spending far more time than we're used to with those who share our homes. However, for some, staying home can be uncomfortable or intolerable. With me tonight is family therapist Stephen Derrick, Matt Tattersley, the manager of a men's support group Caring Dads, and Ron Batiste, a member of Leeds Dads. So if you have any questions, messages on facebook.com/Leeds Dads or @Leeds Dads on Twitter, and we'll do our best to answer. Can you all say hello, guys?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Great. So Matt, can you tell us a bit about Caring Dads, please?
Yeah, of course. So Caring Dads is first of all, Caring Dads is a group work program, essentially, that is licensed and has been developed in Canada. Now, some 5 or 6 years ago, Leeds City Council, if you like, were looking for a better response to working with men who had committed domestic abuse within their families. And the Leeds Domestic Violence team at the time came across Caring Dads, and as a concept, as a program, they were really excited by it because, if you like, the program is essentially linking being a good partner to being a better father, and often men.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, what was the?
Yeah, so if you like, then the kind of essence of the program sells the idea that to be a good role model, a good father, then you kind of need to be finding a way to have a respectful relationship with your child's mother. So anyway, Caring Dads was set up in Leeds some 5 years ago, and we're a team within Leeds City Council, and we offer group work programs for men several times a year in different communities in Leeds.
Right.
Now, of course, right now things are slightly different. Now we're having to operate differently, which I can talk about over the course of the next 45 minutes, an hour.
Sure, that's great. And what have you seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks in Leeds? How have things changed in terms of your work and the impact of coronavirus?
I mean, I think there's no doubt that our work has seen a real increase in terms of referrals coming in, and people being quite worried about domestic violence, and that's reflected in the media. Now, what we're finding in terms of the work we're picking up is that if you like, the risk that what we're used to dealing with and how we're used to working with men is completely different, because we're all almost on a different playing field. So a lot of our work is about almost crisis management at this moment in time, and it's not about kind of longer term behavioral change that we'd work on. So if this makes sense, Erroll, it's a lot about us providing kind of support but coping strategies, trying to find ways of diffusing challenging situations, and I think this will come out as we talk, but what we're finding that men are really struggling with is the fact that we're all seeing each other far more than we used to, and with that intense, that anxiety that people are faced with is a real challenge for people. So almost connecting and maintaining those relationships is even more of a challenge, as you know, coupled with the fact that a lot of the men we're working with have complications in their lives already.
Absolutely. We'll talk a little more about the coping strategies later, but should we be surprised that people's behaviour is changing as we're restricted like this? Matt?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
We'll talk about coping strategies later, but should we be surprised that people's behaviour is changing as we're being restricted in the way we're living?
I don't think so. As I said, I think we're all, you know, everyone is feeling the challenge, the pinch, you know, not being able to, for instance, we can't see our friends, our loved ones, we can't have the same relationship as before. So therefore, people's support networks are massively reduced at a time where we all kind of need support, right? So that is something we're seeing. But again, you know, the men are coming across, where we're working with, are faced with, you know, same pressures as a lot of people, i.e. Job loss as well, or job insecurity. So those are real pressures. And you know, another thing where again we're coming across is that you know, some of the men we work with might not necessarily be living with their children. So for instance, you know, that challenge of one having some sort of meaningful contact, but not being able to do that face to face is a real challenge for some people. And you know, we're finding that part of our work is almost looking at ways of how can you maintain that connection with your child, even though you can't see them, can't have physical contact. That is a real challenge, as well as as I said, the economical and social pressures we're all faced with.
Thanks very much. Our focus tonight is on relationships. Many of us are spending far more time than we're used to with those who share our homes. However, for some, staying home can be uncomfortable or intolerable. With us tonight is family therapist Stephen Derrick, Matt Tattersley, the manager of men's support group Caring Dads, and Ron Batiste, a member of Leeds Dads who has experience in the care field. Family therapist Stephen Derrick, you have a particular interest in working with fathers in the context of relationships with themselves and their partners. What's built your interest, and what have you found?
I think for me, just going back to the part that Matt made, in that I think as humans, we are habitual creatures. If we get into habits and patterns of behavior, we tend to struggle with change. And I think this lockdown or restriction has forced people to make changes that ordinarily they find difficult. And I think the reason I got into a particular interest with men was a lot of the work that I do with couples and families was particularly around transitions around them becoming fathers, was they were having to deal with not only becoming a father, but actually what it meant for them and their own childhood and their own early life experiences. And what we found was a lot of fathers were struggling, wanted to be different to their experiences. They had a bad experience as being fathers,
Sure.
but didn't quite know how have the tools to be able to make that adjustment in being supportive to their partner, and particularly around that transition from going from a couple to a family unit, and also having to address their own childhood, maybe difficulties that they didn't really resolve. And what I found was working with men was if you provided a space, they were able to work through some of those difficulties, particularly wanting to be different fathers than they were parents.
Than how they were parenting.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And,
we'll go into that in a minute. But what about right now? How are families doing, and how are dads
right
doing?
now, I think we're doing a lot of work with the existing clients of just providing conversations for them to make sense of some of the frustrations they might be having or anxieties, helping them to think about other ways of seeing something, diffusing it in a way. How do they start talking again in a way that's not confrontational, and also to give them a space to think and talk when they find it difficult. So what we're doing at this moment in time is just holding families during this process, giving them a space where they could talk, particularly around the frustration of how they interpret each other's behaviors, because often it's not what's said or what's done, but their interpretation of it, and how that could escalate into miscommunication, and then it leads into conflict. So part of the work is to try and provide tools to help them to decode what's going on and to find alternative ways of potentially viewing something.
Is this what you'd expect?
Yes.
This reaction, the way people are behaving at the moment.
Well, if you think about a typical couple who they both work, so they both go out to work, and then maybe a child goes to school, and then you put them in an environment which that normal routine that they've established gets disrupted, and they've got to create something new out of that. I think that's in itself causes a lot of friction. And how do they, some of the tension that might occur that gets diffused, maybe them going to work or having an outlet, all of a sudden it's in the house. Where do they get the outlet? How do they express it in a way that's healthy? Yeah. And so it's those difficulties and managing their own frustrations, anxieties, as Matt was saying, the financial insecurities that a lot of families are facing. And also, the challenges of having children. If you think about our children, having children, particularly school-age children, they usually go to school 38 weeks out the week, and now they're at home
38 weeks out
on top of everything else. So I think it's not just one thing; it's accumulation of different things that creates tension.
So, are people reaching? These are the people that you're seeing at the moment, but you may have been seeing these people before the last 6-7 weeks. Are people reaching out for help? Because don't forget, we've been told to stay home and protect the NHS.
I think
and local authority services.
Yes. I think usually through telephone calls or one or two. In terms of my own private practice, I do a lot of Zoom work with couples just to help them think about where the difficulties lie, around what's the first casualties of when things start breaking down. What's the warning signs? Mm-hmm. What happens to their intimacy in terms of emotional, physical intimacy, and just helping to think about managing those areas of conflict or misunderstanding that could flare up to frustration and conflict that may bleed into something else.
You're listening to Facebook Live, AskADad with Leeds Dads. With me tonight is family therapist Stephen Derrick, Matt Tattersley, the manager of men's support group Caring Dads, and Ron Batiste, member of Leeds Dads. Ron, have you seen any of the texts coming in?
Yes, I have. I've seen some of them coming in. I think most of them seem to be about parenting with children and so forth. But I think we could probably touch on that a little bit later. I think in terms of the relationships, what Matt and Stephen are mentioning, I think if we could just explore that a little bit more, but we will come to those other questions a little later on. But I'd just like to add that from what Matt and Stephen have said, you know, everybody's just been thrown into a situation that they have no control over whatsoever. And I think when it comes to relationships, the only way you know how well your relationships functions is at times like these, when times become difficult. And I think this sort of like has shone a real spotlight for many couples in the home, and those who have young children, middle-aged children, middle childhood, and even teenagers. So it's a real massive issue. But also as well, there may be those out there who may be coping quite well with this, and it'll be good to hear from those couples who may be able to throw in some points that are quite helpful. I think it's important not to look at it as all doom and gloom, even though it can feel that way for many people. But I think if there are people out there who are coping, maybe just to probably call in at least, you know, and just let us know what's helping it to work. What strategies are they doing?
It's interesting you were saying that, Ron. I've had quite a few couples who've said it's actually helped their relationship, having this time to slow down, not rush around, hustle and bustle, and it's helped them to reevaluate what their priorities. So
it's helped them.
Yeah, in terms of because a lot of them are having busy jobs, demanding jobs, and having to stay at home. I think the process of slowing down has helped some couples to reevaluate what their priorities are.
Yes.
And maybe to have a shared understanding of what's a priority for them. And also it's helped to some couples who are able to talk things through, they're able to have those difficult conversations and come out the other end of it. And what they're asking now is, how can we keep this when the restrictions are lifted? So I think you're right. I think having a mixed bag of, you know, and part of my work I've done in my private practice is to try to distill what's made it work, what's been helpful for them, and if they were to advise another couple, what would they say to them?
Yes.
We've been talking to lots of people about the AskADad tonight in terms of dealing with relationships. Some people do have, some people are very happy and are able to, as you say, Stephen, solidify and build on their relationships during this time. Not everyone has. Lindsay Foster is a parent community organizer who's been supporting us over the last few weeks, and she's brought in some questions from her colleagues that have come in anonymously. My partner is not used to being home with the kids every day, and I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of World War III, not wanting to side with either. What do I do? Matt, it doesn't sound like it's an issue about a dad understanding himself, but it probably is in one respect, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I guess looking at what a lot of the fathers are faced with right now, you know, there is a lot of time for thinking and reflection. And I mean, I think I'd just like to comment on some of the kind of positives as well, because I'm very aware that in terms of our work and what we do, this could come across as almost like a bit doom and gloom, and every single man we come across is really, really struggling. Now, I think what this is offering an opportunity to do is, and I can talk from my own experience in some extent, but almost like a bit of a realigning of parenting roles for couples as well. So, you know, I'm hearing a lot about fathers, their experience, if you like, just, you know, getting the opportunity to do bedtime routines you know, spending more time with the children than they ever have done because they're just used to being at work. And, you know, so I think there is some real benefits, and there is some opportunities to bond. Nonetheless, you know, there's also a lot of challenges that people are faced with as well.
Okay, well, while you're taking it down that avenue, but people have a lot of stereotypes about men who commit violence against women, against children. What are they, and what are the drivers behind the men? What causes the behaviour? Because let's try and explore them and say, why do dads strike out? And is it about their anger to someone else, or is it about something deeper?
I mean, first of all, the one thing I want to say is that, you know, there are a lot of themes and trends, if you like, that lead for a man to, you know, act out abusive behaviours in his relationship, but there is no one specific thing. So, for instance, you know, a lot of the men we come across, it's not uncommon for them to talk about adverse childhood experiences when, you know, and in some ways that can be very useful tool to talk about, to create some motivation, i.e. I don't want to go down that route myself. But also, I think what I would say with that is not everyone who has you know, experienced trauma, or maybe their father being abusive to their mother, is going to go down that path. You know, I think there is some links there. You know, a lot of the men we work with talk about, you know, their lack of role models. I think as well, in terms of when we talk with men about incidents or things that have led to, you know, incidents basically, a lot of that kind of stems from deep-rooted feelings of worthlessness, vulnerability themselves, you know, using a kind of a CBT approach, if you like. We look at feelings that a lot of the men were faced with, and when you dig or scratch the surface, often it is them feeling belittled, frustrated, as I said, worthless, undervalued, those sorts of things. So
you're turning stereotype on its head there, because some people might think that men who commit violence to their partners are arrogant, self-centered, thinking about themselves. But you're basically saying that they could have low confidence. They could be very vulnerable people.
Absolutely, and I think, for instance, pretty much every single program we run, we're coming across quite a high percentage of men who, you know, are battling, are really suffering with their mental health. And again, you know, that's not to excuse the matter, but that can be a driver to some of this, you know, this behaviour. You know, so some of the work we often do when we're doing it at the minute is, you know, the idea of what is assertive behaviour. You know, how do you have a disagreement with someone in a peaceful way, at the same time looking at fair arguing, what that looks like, actually being able to put your point across in a way that meets the needs of the other people. So yeah, you know, just to kind of respond to that, no, you know, a lot of the men we are coming across have many challenges in life, and you know, there is an element of, and I think Stephen alluded to it, us to be able to do some deep and meaningful work with a lot of the men, we need to be able to build a place of safety and you know, build a place of a trusting environment, you know, to help them feel comfortable enough to be open, which I guess lends itself well to kind of the work that you do, Stephen.
And also for them to be challenged, which is part of the work. And I think what that really to Matt is that they have to be challenged alongside getting better understanding of some of their own, I suppose, insecurities and vulnerabilities that my experience they try to mask.
Yeah, sure.
And I suppose part of the lashing out is a form of trying to keep control of something that they have no control over.
That's right.
And within that, there's just a deep sense of inadequacy.
So what will
So it's about separating the behaviour which they need to be accountable for, and actually what their needs are to help them self-regulate those emotions that they find difficult to manage outside of trying to control a situation, which is inappropriate.
So what will men who have behavioural issues, what will they be thinking about their relationship with the people around them? Would they be pretty upset, or would they try not to see that and think, okay, we're in this restricted environment? I'm loath to say lockdown because it's not lockdown. We can go to the shops, we can walk down the street. There are some countries where you can't do anything. If you live as a couple, you can only go out as one person, as a single person. But yes, what will they be thinking about their relationships? Will they be seeing their errors, or will they be sort of like smoothing over them and pretending not to see any of the problems that exist? Stephen?
I think they'll be trying their best. I don't think men go out to be deliberately destructive. I think they try their best, but I suspect. I was thinking about the word lockdown, and to some people it is a lockdown, because if you think about if your way of coping is to get out and to work, and maybe they go to the gym or do certain things to express that frustration or de-escalate those frustrations, and you can't do it, that's manifestations of those frustrations. What do you do with it? So I think for me, it's thinking about helping men in that situation think about what can they do that could be helpful outside of what they already know, which is unhelpful. But I suspect what could happen in the family home is tensions building, nobody's talking, and then it explodes. And it's thinking about what form of communication might be helpful. I was thinking about there's the person that anonymously made a suggestion to the conversation. And one of the things I've been thinking about is there a space we could go and walk, just have a walk and have a talk? Because so often it's about trying to get a sense of what's going on for both persons and what can they do about it if they're able to be in that place.
Okay, Ron, have you
I just wanted to jump in there. I think there was so much real deep stuff that Matt and Stephen were talking about. And I think with Matt, you mentioned the thing CBT, and I think for people who are not aware of what CBT is as cognitive behavioral therapy, and I tend to sort of explain it as thoughts, feelings, and actions, really. And I think it would be good if we could give sort of like a very simple explanation in terms of a practical way how, you know, couples can apply that, you know, in this current situation, because I think I can speak for myself that, you know, this sort of thoughts, feelings, you know, it raises your awareness of that. And if you can actually be in touch with that, and I know that Stephen and Matt would actually have a strong awareness of the term emotional intelligence. And I suppose that is something that the work that you do raises that kind of emotional intelligence in men, so that they can be very self-aware of how they feel, what that feeling leads to, and how they're going to reprocess it and reinterpret it in order to avoid any kind of conflict. So I don't know if we want to sort of give a few examples of that.
I can tell you how we use it and how we apply it, if that helps.
Yeah. Yes.
So from our end, what we would generally do, we would use cognitive behavioral therapy to, I guess, deconstruct a incident that a man discloses to us, and usually that's an incident where he's behaved in a way that he regrets. And we would we would do that by asking him to talk it through in great
Yes.
detail.
Yes.
Where he was, when he was, what he was wearing, what he said, you know, what she said, or what the child said, you know. And from there, we would ask the man to talk about, you know, actually, what were you feeling just before you behaved abusively? And you know, quite often people can identify with anger as, you know, I was angry. But our job is to try and get beneath that. And I think I alluded to feelings of vulnerability or worthlessness, which we find is often that's the driver here. It's not necessarily anger, and we kind of see anger as a bit of a secondary emotion, if you like.
Yes.
And then from there, we would talk about thought process. So, okay, you've listed all these feelings. So, tell us what you were thinking at that time, and almost what were you saying to yourself? What was that voice in your head saying? And get, you know, and doing this in a very visual way, and asking the man to, well, we would write these down, and it's all there in front of him. And of course, we're aware of, you know, what the action was, and he would tell us that in detail. And again, having a bit of a visual, it's a very simple concept, and I'm sure people listening will be familiar with a Cbt triangle. We use that.
I think you should explain CBT a little more detail, please. Just briefly.
Briefly, well, I can't really say much more than that because I'm no expert at all. We use a very basic form of it, but essentially we see it as, in terms of your actions, that is informed by your emotions at the time, and also your thought process. And again, in terms of how we use that, we try to reframe and encourage the men we work with in terms of your thoughts. Well, those were quite negative. What could have a more positive thought process have been? And that kind of positive self-talk, how can you retrain yourself to use that, if that makes sense? So yeah, that's how we would use it. Stephen, you will probably have a far better concrete version of that than myself.
I think, I think from the point of view, because I'm CBT trained as well as systemically trained, and I think thoughts, behavior, and consequences, or the ABC, which is the action, the behavior, the consequence. And so I think what we help men to think about is what are you telling yourself, similar to what Matt was saying, what are you telling yourself? What are the dominant emotions attached to it? What are the physical sensations that occur? What did you do? And I think the bit that we add is, what was the immediate outcome? And the immediate outcome was there was quiet, or whatever it was. And then we look at the long-term consequence, and is that what they wanted? And so it's getting them to look at that, and also getting them to look at what are the beliefs attached to what they're trying to do. With men that I've worked with more in the more longer term, we would look at their history and plot that, and particularly where there was disruptions in their childhood, where did they first learn violence or anger was a useful thing to do. When did they first do it? What was going on? What did they get out of it? Who endorsed it? Who didn't endorse it? What message did they pick up from either their fathers or other males that influenced them? So it would draw a really big picture, and then we'll start looking about what they want to do about that. So it's detailed in a way of helping them to think about themselves, and also the consequences it has on their partners and their children.
I'm Erroll Murray, and you're tuned into Leeds Dad's Facebook Live AskADad. Our focus tonight is on relationships. Many of us are spending far more time than we used to with those who share our homes. However, for some, staying at home can be uncomfortable or even intolerable. The UK's largest domestic abuse charity, Refuge, has reported a 700% increase in calls to its helpline in a single day, whilst a separate helpline for perpetrators of domestic abuse seeking help to change their behaviour have received 25% more calls after the start of the COVID lockdown. But it's not a lockdown. It's not a lockdown. It's a restriction. With me tonight is family therapist Stephen Derrick, Matt Tattersley, the manager of men's support group Caring Dads, Ron Batiste, member of Leeds Dads. And if you have any questions, please get in touch. Message us on facebook.com/Leeds Dads or @Leeds Dads on Twitter, and we'll do our best to answer. The time's flying away. I'm going to try and focus the last 10 minutes on some of the questions that people have been putting in.
I just wanted to jump in there, Erroll. I think you read my mind, really. I see a question here from Jade Taylor. My boy's dad hadn't been able to see his children during this pandemic. He suffered emotionally, staying in bed, etc., and it's even more affected his current relationship with his girlfriend. What could I do to help him through this difficult time other than phone calls? I think that's something that it's very interesting, very profound, that question. If Matt or Stephen could say something or give some form of credible advice, really.
You said that he's spending a lot of time in bed?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Has he phoned his GP to find out what his current mood is? Is that something that he's done? I'd be really curious about that. I would probably encourage maybe some kind of contact with his GP to do an assessment on his mood. From a practical point of view, I mean, technology is brilliant. I mean, if he's missing his children, what they could do is maybe do a video or something, they record something, and so send it to him. It could be something that's just what they can do together. So he's connected with the children. But I think the thing that I'll be focusing on initially would be about his mental state and what support he's going to need to help him lift himself so that he can engage back in with the children and also the relationship.
Taylor has said, are dads self-referred to Caring Dads, or are they referred by a third party? Matt?
So referrals made to Caring Dads are made from professionals. So we get about 90% of our referrals from from children's social workers. We stipulate that there is a active professional involved who can, I guess, do quite a few things. Support him, number one, that's important. Champion his cause, checking how progress is going, but ultimately it's about safety for us. And our work, we work on the understanding that in some cases, risk can increase before things get better, because we're working on difficult, stressful subjects. So therefore, having someone who is present, has a reasonably good eye on what's going on in the family dynamics, etc., it's just really important that we can feed that in, because if there is some difficulties in the family home, and the chaps attending our group, it's likely that we'll get a sense of that because of the intensity of the work. So we're quite precious on the fact that there is a referral and there is somebody who can support the work that's going on.
But if social workers aren't involved, is there another way of you say 90%, so I guess there are alternatives. Would it be through schools, through children's centres? Where else could people go?
I mean, our sense of it is we want to be flexible. So we don't stipulate a certain service, but to give you examples, for instance, probation have referred into us before. We might get referrals from third sector services. For instance, schools, quite often in most schools these days, there is pastoral support. And there is workers who have less of a teaching role, but perhaps, understand what's going on in the family, no mum, no dad. So those workers, for instance, we will sometimes get those guys referring in and fulfilling the case holder role. Yeah, that makes sense.
Ron, there's a message that's come in on regarding DV perpetrators.
Yes, I saw that from Jay Taylor as well. Women are DV perpetrators too. Is there support for men affected by this? I think as well that if you look at services at the moment, there are services for men, but I'm not too sure if they're really government funded of such. You see, I think most of the government funding is for services for women who are victims of domestic abuse. But if I think Matt, I think you might know a little bit more about what services that they could access in terms of men being victims of domestic abuse.
I think first thing to point out is, that is a topic that we're learning more and more about as time goes by. I think historically we've looked at domestic violence as a very gendered issue, and let's not lie. There are reasons for that, because that the statistics tell us that more often than not, it is the man, and and there's reasons for that going back many years. But yes, to answer your question, there is support out there for men who are suffering domestic abuse. In Leeds, we have Leeds Domestic Violence Services, who is a consortium made up of several other small community services. So in Leeds Domestic Violence Services would be the place to go, and they would coordinate support for any case of the man who was suffering abuse.
But I just want to jump in there as well a bit, Matt, because when you look at the domestic abuse, gender-based, how we look at it, I mean, a lot of men, and correct me if I'm wrong in terms of my thinking, could it be that a lot of men want help, but are too ashamed and too embarrassed in terms of saying, well, I need help? You see what I mean? Is there something to be said about that? And what can be said to encourage men who perhaps low self-esteem, low confidence, and who resort to physical aggression in order to be heard, as it were?
I think the first thing to respond to that is that certainly I think that as far as speaking up, seeking support goes, then of course the whole masculinity issue and what it means to be a man, and the man's code that let's be honest, all of us here talking will have felt part of that,
Yes.
And the pressures of that. So that definitely it does get in the way of men seeking support. I have no doubt about it. I guess just moving, digressing slightly. There was a really interesting BBC One documentary last year. I think it was called "Abused by My Girlfriend," and it was about a young man. I think it was East Anglia somewhere, and that was just so revealing about actually, the issues he was faced with, and again, some of the barriers for seeking support, and as I say, really insightful, and I think it shone a light on that as a subject, which is a really good thing.
Could I just interject?
Of course.
Just, I think one of the things that we've got to recognise is violence is a learned behaviour, and both male and female are susceptible to it. And in my previous job, I worked with a lot of men who had either physical or cognitive disabilities, and they were victims of violence by their partners, but there was nowhere for them to go for support, bar one that I knew of. So I think there's something about the narrative around domestic violence that it's a learned behavior, and although our system is geared to supporting women, and rightly so, it also needs to have the parity for men who are suffering and potentially suffering in silence.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
That's great. We've got a lot of questions. We're literally out of time. We may have to run over a few minutes, if that's okay with you guys.
That's okay. That's fine.
We've just gone through this. What can dads do more of to help to support single mums while the kids are off school? So this isn't directly about say anger management or violence, but it is about something that comes from this, because there's going to be a lot of frustration, a lot of confusion in the home. How can you help to diffuse that?
Could I just jump in a bit and say, well, I think, you know, for myself, you know, generally being the primary carer of the children and my wife going out to work, and now the situation, both of us are at home, we're actually working out ways in terms of routines, you know. So I get them up in the morning, she puts them to bed, or sometimes she gets them up, I put them to bed. It's sort of like some kind of, you know, sometimes you're just forced into a situation where you've just got to share the roles and maintain some sort of order in the home. And I think, you know, one of the ways to avoid or to support each other, which actually helps minimize the stress, is looking at those routines and trying to agree. Negotiation and agreement, I think, is a very important thing, and it's all about communication. And I know saying that is quite straightforward, but to communicate is such a big thing, and it takes so many different aspects of ourselves as a person in terms of the non-verbal cues. Not only we spend a lot of time with the talking and so forth, but there's also the non-verbal cues, the gestures, the actual situational communication, where we only talk more in a particular situation, and other situations where we should be talking more, we're not. So, you know, and I know that Stephen, you know, would probably know a bit more about that in terms of the CBT stuff. And I know, Matt, you would have probably had similar discussions with men, and in terms of what they could do to face those feelings that prevent them from speaking about issues that they should really speak about, you see. And I'm just saying this in terms of our listeners and our viewers, in terms of what practical stuff can be relayed to any men who are listening out there.
I suppose, I mean, connected to that, I was thinking about what the person who wrote in asked was about fathers who are non-residential.
Yes.
I'm thinking about what, you know, if they've got a good working parenting relationship but not living together, I think one of the practical things that I find very useful is making use of maybe remote devices like, you know, Zoom or WhatsApp or Skype, and maybe having those conversations with the children. So he's a parent, but he's a parent from a different position.
Yes.
So I think, going back to that question, I think one of the practical things, if this communication is good and she's frustrated, or maybe if things are difficult, maybe there's a way of introducing dad into the picture in a way that he feels useful, and she's able to. I think it's about building that unified parental position.
Yes.
Mum and dad are together. They're not together, but they are together for the children. If that relationship could hold that, I think that might be helpful.
There's another question that's come in. My partner is becoming increasingly controlling and making accusations, even though I'm not leaving the house. What do I do? I leave that with you, Matt.
I would say seek support. Now, that might be initially from someone you feel you can trust and you feel comfortable with. You know, that might be with your GP. That might be with a specialist service such as Leeds Domestic Violence Service that I have spoke to. But in the meantime, without knowing much context, I think it's important that you talk to someone about this. And I think, namely, that has to be a person you feel comfortable talking to. That would be my advice.
Another, we're going to have to bullet through some of these, I'm afraid. How do couples with pre-existing relationship issues not let this add to their existing problems? Stephen?
Talking. I think finding a space, and it's easier said than done, but maybe they have to make a concerted effort to have a space, or maybe go for a walk and just talk things through. And I suppose there's got to be a willingness, if there's the resources within them, to be able to address some of the underlying issues and how they want to deal with it. And I think at the heart of it is that the underlying question is, do they want to remain together?
Yeah.
And if they do, then what did they do together to make it better? I think, and that could be quite tricky, saying, have we got enough resources within this relationship to stay together? And if we want to stay together, then I think that's the platform to build from. If it's not that, and they're having questions about the relationship, then maybe thinking, which is most people don't talk about, how can we separate in a way that's healthy?
Yeah.
These are questions coming from Lindsay Foster, a parent, community organizer, who's been very supportive. Not everyone feels confident putting their points across, so it's always great to have someone who can do this for us. My partner is ignoring lockdown rules and inviting people into our home and putting myself and the kids at risk. He gets upset when I question him. What's the best way to deal with it? I'll come back to you, Matt.
It's easier said than done, but yeah, I think in the first instance, it's trying to find a way of having that kind of reasonable conversation with your partner. You know, maybe I think based on some of the things you were saying, Stephen, is often when there's conflict, almost trying to set some ground rules about how we have serious conversations. You know, that might be that there's, you know, each person has to kind of listen to each person's point of view. We have and it's geared towards men, but we have a bit of a framework and we call it fair arguing, if that makes sense, a way of putting your point across and expressing yourself. But again, there's some basic ground rules around that. I think trying to find the grounds to have a meaningful conversation where people can hear each other is my advice. Easier said than done.
How would you address that, Stephen?
I think she's in a tricky situation, so we've got to acknowledge that to begin with. I think one of the things I would do, if they're able to talk, where's a good place to talk about this particular issue? If she's finding it very difficult, maybe one of the things she could do is, if there's somebody that actually has some influence on the family, on the husband, to help him talk to him about her concerns. So maybe if it's too difficult one way, and I think she's, from my point of view, has a legitimate concern, is there a way of raising the issue which wouldn't, because it feels like there's a power struggle here.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's something about needing some kind of conversation with somebody that the husband may have respect, or maybe have influence over him, to have a different kind of conversation about her concerns.
Almost a mediator.
Yes, a mediator is probably, I would say that, but it feels like that's a bit of a power struggle.
Ron, did you see the post about religion?
Did I see it? Hold on, I think I did see something, but things have gone down so quick.
We've got another one we've got another one that's come in about an email that's come in. I wasn't happy to post it on live, as my husband is a private person. Anyway, he's self-employed but isolated like most for 9 weeks now, not sleeping or eating, and is becoming very distant from me, very snappy, argumentative, although he will say he's not. It's affecting all of us and our kids too. He will say he's okay, he's opened up about his feelings, but he doesn't like the thought of letting him get to, it doesn't like the thought of this letting him get to him. It's really hard. Any advice would be a great thing. He doesn't have friends or family, just me. I can tell my friends or offload because I don't want him being judged either. But since isolation, it's got a lot more difficult for both of us, really. These are real world problems.
Yes, they are. I mean, I don't think. I think it's a question better for probably Stephen to answer. But I just wanted to say something in terms of, you know, people find themselves in a situation where they're forced to perhaps use some kind of emotional therapeutic support that is way out of their depth, and I think that just sounds like something that needs professional help, as it were.
I would encourage her to access a GP. All the warning signs are there. There are potential warning signs: self-isolation, the snappiness, the denial. And I think if she could encourage him to speak to his GP about how he's feeling in a confidential space, maybe it might help in terms of medication or signposting to some kind of service to help him work through what he's struggling with. And it's clear from what well, it's not clear, but I get a suggestion, I get an impression that he doesn't want to burden his family in how he's feeling. So I think maybe a third party, like a professional, might be helpful.
Real challenge there, Matt.
So, sorry, what was that? I missed that.
It was a real challenge. It sounds like a real challenge because it sounds like this person doesn't want to be. He doesn't see. He sees himself as a burden. He doesn't want to be a burden, but he doesn't want to seek help.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to some of the things we were talking about earlier about potentially men feeling certain pressure to respond to challenges in a certain way, and as men, I'm not afraid of saying this, we're not generally taught by society to talk about our problems, and but I agree with what Stephen's saying. It sounds like there is a need for some sort of professional support there. I just wonder what kind of friends or support network he has as well. If is there someone there who potentially is close to him who you might be able to talk to as well.
This is the challenge because she says that he doesn't have friends and or family either.
Right.
I would say the first port call is GP. That's what I would say as a real growing concern. And even if he struggles, she could also call the GP because maybe they could get a mental health nurse to come in and just have a chat. There are different avenues that I think definitely the first part of call is to contact a GP with her concerns if her husband doesn't feel able to do it, or maybe talk to him and see if he wants to do it.
Ron, sorry, did you see the post about religion?
No, I couldn't. I can't find it for some reason.
The connection there.
No. Is it right to the top? Is it or something?
Yes. Leona is saying, "Are more families seeking?"
Oh
religion?
yes. Are more families seeking religion at this time? Well, in my experience, I'm not sure, but what I do know is that in terms of Christians, people who I've spoken to, whether Christian or Muslims, and even in the media and people I know, that there's a lot more social media being used to conduct church services, prayer groups. You have lots of social media WhatsApp groups being set up for prayer sessions and things like that. So there is, I would say, a turn to religion, as it were. And I know that I was listening to the news, I think maybe a week or two ago, and I think the Church of England was saying that, when before COVID-19, the churches were empty, but now, in terms of people staying at home, their websites, in terms of the Zoom services, are attracting double or triple the amount of people who would be in the churches, as it were. So they're even considering it as a possible way forward in terms of holding services as an alternative, not as the main rule, but something to consider, as it were. You see, and I suppose with different people in terms of their relationships as well. Some people will turn to counselors, would turn to therapists in order to sort out their religion, where people of a religious persuasion will seek spiritual help. And
that's the point that I'm raising here with this question. It does seem that people are looking for support elsewhere, but are they going to the bodies such as caring dads, such as family therapy? They're not going down the pub to talk to their friends, or are they just chewing their teeth and stomping around the house? What do you think's happening?
I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is this situation is causing people to reflect on their lives. And I think it's having a profound effect on maybe how people want to move forward. It may be that some people just want to make a complete change. I think it's almost like a pausing time where people are forced to look at their situation themselves and their relationships and asking, I suppose, the questions that maybe ordinarily in a busy lifestyle you wouldn't ask.
Yes.
And religion might be part of that. Part of that might be seeking alternative ways of living. Some of it would be about ending certain situations. So I think providing a space for people to be able to think and reflect and ask those fundamental questions, I think is something that I think a lot of families, including myself, is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
We're literally out of time. I'd like a couple of points from each of you. We've had a couple of questions on advice. Alex is asking questions to the professionals. No offense, Erroll. What delete? What are the 3 top tips you find yourself giving out to people since lockdown? I'll give you a bit more than 3. Matt, what would you suggest? What are the strategies to manage through this situation?
I think it sounds very, very, very obvious, but coping strategies. What is your ways of having a bit of downtime at the minute? For instance, can you spend time in the garden? Exercise every day is really useful. I think we've talked about communication so many times tonight. But communicate with your loved ones in terms of what your expectations of each other, but communicate with your friends as well, and try and bridge that gap, if you like, of social support that there is at the minute. So those would be my go-to piece of advice, which
You've mentioned positive self-talk to me before, and
Oh,
I didn't
yes.
understand it then. But can you explain it now, please?
So it fits in with what I was talking about in terms of the thinking part of your brain and what you actually sometimes say to yourself in challenging situations. So it could be that the children are doing it to wind me up. They always play up at bedtime. But the kind of simple way of it is might be, well, actually, they are 7 or 8 years old. This is normal childhood behavior. So it's kind of just the positive self-talk element is just trying to reframe the negativity that you're telling yourself, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see now. Stephen, can you give us some top tips, please?
Yeah, I've got 3. The first one I would say is build space to communicate. So make space to talk. And it doesn't have to be a drawn out thing. It could be a 5-minute conversation, but make time to talk. The second thing I would say is, if you're in a relationship, is to do something for the other person, which takes the emphasis away. And the reason I'm saying that is because if I'm doing something for somebody else, I stop thinking about me, which then could lead to the idea that I've been done too. So do something nice for your partner. Maybe get up in the morning instead of he or she getting up. Maybe cook a meal when the other person cooks, is the majority cooker. So it's thinking about things that you can do, which is about showing appreciation, little things. And the final thing is do something like go for walks, be physical. Because we know physical activities helps with sustaining good mental health.
Yeah.
Okay.
Particularly if we think about us, where we normally we get up in the morning, we'll get the kids ready, we'll dash out to school, then we go to work. We're constantly on the move, and all of a sudden we're restricted. I think continuing to be physically active is good for your mental health.
Okay, that's great. Ron, any thoughts to add there?
No, I think they've covered it. Matt and Stephen have really covered it. I don't think there's anything more I could add, but I'll just say in terms of looking after yourself, and looking after your partner, your husband or wife, I think that's really, really important to survive this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Many thanks to everyone for being part of tonight's broadcast. Our focus was on relationships. Many of us are spending far more time than we're used to with those who share our homes. However, for some, staying indoors can be uncomfortable or intolerable. With me tonight was family therapist Stephen Derrick, who has a particular interest with working with fathers in the context of relationships with themselves and with their families. Matt Tattersley, the manager of men's support group Caring Dads. We should give you a shout for your a web link or web people contacting you.
Yes, please.
Matt?
Yeah. Yes, you can access some quick clips, but we call them, and those are a collection of self-help and issue-based ideas particularly for men and fathers during COVID-19, and you can access those through Caring Dads quick clips on YouTube. You'll find them.
Great. Ron Batiste, member of Leeds Dads. Thanks very much for your support tonight, Ron.
Thanks.
Thanks. Knowledge empowers, and even when we find out things about this virus which might be worrying, as we understand more, the less worried we will be. Don't forget, as well as our AskADad Facebook Live, this week we have Leeds Dad's virtual playhouse normally on Sundays, but this week it's on Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Leeds Dad's quiz night on WhatsApp. That's Sunday nights at 8. Just contact us and we'll put you into the group. And Leeds Dad's food parcel service that goes out on Wednesdays. It's all here on our Facebook page. I'm Erroll Murray from Leeds Dads. You can find us if you need to email us, leedsdads@gmail.com. And we hope to be back soon. Thanks very much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.